Hi, and welcome to this live webinar on health and safety in your food and beverage production. So today you have myself, Erica, as the presenter, and our expert on global health and safety is Kate Field. Now, Kate has almost 20 years in health and safety. She's an ex-HSE inspector and she leads the health and safety portfolio for BSI globally. On today's webinar, we'll give you a brief overview of BSI, who we are and what we do in relation to health and safety in the food sector, why ethical trade is important to the food sector, health and safety challenges in food and beverage production, the impact on a sustainable workforce, and how ISO 45001 can help your organisation. And also for those of you transitioning from OHS 18001 to ISO 45001, there'll be a few tips along the way to pick up too. So a little bit about us. We have a global reach and our clients represent 50% of the Fortune 500 as well as thousands of SMEs. So this includes health and safety customers all over the world and food customers globally too. In terms of our experience, we've been around for a while. So the very first tram tracks laid down and standardised. We helped to standardise tram tracks and right through to the Internet of Things, so the smart devices in your homes, making sure that those are safe, secure, and again standardized to provide you with the best experience. So to kick off the core of today's webinar, we've got a bit of a poll, and again we do invite you to interact with the polls today and submit your views and be heard. So our first poll: within your job role, which statement best describes your level of responsibility for health and safety? So is health and safety the main focus of your role? Is health and safety a component of your role? Maybe you wear other hats too? Or are you not responsible for health and safety, just looking to find out some more information? Or are you not really sure how health and safety is affecting your role? So for most of you, health and safety is a component of your role. It's part of what you do, but it's not everything to your role. And there's also a number of you who aren't responsible for health and safety, so about a quarter of you, and 8% of you where health and safety is the core of your role. So now I'll hand you over to our expert, Kate.
Thank you, Erica, and morning everybody. It's nice to have so many of you join us this morning. So this webinar is really just to give you an overview of health and safety in the context of the food and beverage industry. We're not able to cover everything, unfortunately, in an hour, but we have lots of free information available on the website. So if you need more detailed information, you can go there. As Erica said, do please ask questions, and we'll, I'll either try and answer them as we go through, or we'll aim to pick them up at the end. So I think one of the things that's really started to become a key agenda item within the food and beverage industry is around ethical trade, and this is really moving on from the well-established fair trade idea. But the key thing with ethical trade is that it's driven by consumers and also buyers in the supply chain, who are willing to pay higher prices in order to seek assurance that the production of whatever it is that they're buying is ethical. And it is more than fair trade. It's a much more holistic approach. So moving away from just sort of fair prices and a fairer deal to those doing the production, to embedding the principles of what's termed decent work. And this comes from the International Labour Organization, also the United Nations, and I'm sure some of you will be familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals, and one of the key components of that is decent work. And what does it cover then? So it covers aspects, things like employment is freely chosen, so people aren't forced into work, not using child labour, that living wages are paid, that working hours aren't excessive, that regular employment is provided, that no harsh or inhumane treatment is allowed. And really importantly, this new ethical focus includes working conditions that are safe and hygienic. So really ensuring that, you know, health and safety of those involved in the production of food and beverage is at the heart of what's seen. We're seeing it particularly driven in sort of coffee, cocoa and palm oil supply chain, you know, so that's factoring in globally, but we are seeing it come through much more into other areas within the sector. And I think the other thing that we're also seeing is that there's a move for regulation to actually, if you like, reinforce or enforce, you know, these ethical principles. I mean, we've got things like the Modern Slavery Act, you know, that there is a change to not only encourage organisations through sort of code and conducts and schemes like the SMETA audit, which is one of the schemes that we offer, which, you know, we have seen an uptake in because it's looking at this broader holistic piece, but we are seeing the reputation. And I think that the last factor that in terms of why we're seeing this is, you know, particularly for the supply chain, large organizations are really conscious about their brand and ensuring that they manage their reputation. So ensuring that the partners that they have throughout the supply chain follow ethical practices is a key part of their risk management for their own organizations. So I think it's worth touching on some additional statistics. So BSI sponsor a report every year looking at business continuity and speaking with organisations around the globe to understand what have been the biggest disruptors for them in that year and what the future might look like. And you can see in terms of this slide, the two areas circled. Number 2 is health and safety incidents, and number 5, product quality incidents and product recall. And I think this was really interesting because quite often when you're talking to particularly senior executives and, you know, you ask the question, you know, what's your biggest risk? What keeps you up at night? They tend to talk about cyber attacks and those sorts of things. But actually here we've got the evidence that after unplanned IT and telecom issues, the second biggest incident disruptor is health and safety incidents. And looking at, you know, and that's increased by sort of up 10 points from the previous year. But product issues have also increased by a similar margin, up 11 places from the previous year. And I think it's really important to understand that there is a recognised relationship around good health and safety and good quality, or poor health and safety and poor quality. And obviously within the food and beverage sector, you know, quality is at the heart of what you need to deliver and everything that you seek to do. And, you know, there's increasing focus on food safety culture, really to address some of those quality concerns. But if you don't address health and safety, if you don't give it the same priority, then you're not going to see the improvements in terms of product quality. So it's really something to consider. It's also worth mentioning the third element on there around lack of talent and key skills. So this is definitely an area that we're seeing an increasing trend, and you know that there are different challenges, particularly with some aspects of the food industry in terms of, you know, retention and finding people to stay in roles. But again, you know, actually this is causing businesses real headaches. And of course, one of the ways that you can help and support keep people is around having good health and safety and well-being measures, you know, and that's something that we'll touch on as we go through the rest of this presentation. So in terms of those who responded about how much are these disruptors costing them, well, you can see that right at the top is number one, is health and safety, and at nearly 1.2 billion, sorry, I'll just say that again, 1.2 billion US dollars. So again, in terms of the business impact and the cost that poor health and safety has, it really is significant. And again, number 5, there's a lack of talent issue. Cyber is almost nothing in comparison, 144 million. But again, look at what number 2 is, reputation incidents, at just over 1 billion US dollars. And again, this reflects back to this real desire by organisations to protect their reputation, and this is what's really driving the ethical trade agenda and improvements in terms of health and safety. So I mentioned that a lot of these changes are seeing that they're being cascaded out into the actual enforcement regime within countries. And here's just one example. The UK introduced new sentencing guidelines around how much organisations should be fined for breaches of health and safety, and also food safety. And there's been a recent impact assessment of looking at what impact those sentencing guidelines have had, and it has shown that there's been an increase in fines for food safety and hygiene. There's been a really significant increase in health and safety fines, and now the average for really serious incidents, so those that are categorised at the highest level, is on average at £2 million. And we are also seeing an increase in corporate manslaughter, so those the leadership being really held to account in terms of their role and responsibility in terms of poor health and safety. And this is really just to kind of put that in context. These are just some examples of recent prosecutions and fines and that have come from the food and beverage industry, and you can see, significant. So Crush Industries for Two Sisters Food, £1.4 million fine, £1.8 million fine for a fall from height for Caro Foods, 1.9, a second major fine for Warburton's, and there are just so many examples out there, and it's not just in the UK. We're seeing increased focus on regulation and prosecution across the globe. So for instance, just in December 2008 in Australia, Confita, which is a food packaging organisation, they were prosecuted following a serious hand injury in part of their machinery, and they were fined $157,000. So there really is increased focus in this area, and and regulators are looking to fine and hold organisations to account where they've got poor health and safety practice. That's the kind of the why and where we are on this journey. So what are some of the key health and safety challenges that the food and beverage sector challenge? And looking at our responders, we've got a mix that some of you only do health and safety as a component, and some of you aren't responsible for health and safety. So I think it's worth just having a look and exploring, what are the main causes of injury and also ill health in this sector. So on the safety side, we've just seen, that actually we still have a huge number of really serious machinery related injuries within this sector. Work at height, or more specifically falls from heights, are one of the biggest killers. Also workplace transport, again we have a significant number of very serious or fatal injuries in where it's to do with transport, people either being run over by vehicles or falling off vehicles. There's still you know, really scarily, deaths every year where people are entering silos or confined spaces, you know, without the necessarily controls in place. More minor but really common safety incidents. Slips is a big issue within the food sector, and again, you know, those sorts of incidents, whilst they may not be serious and therefore, you know, not have investigation and enforcement around them. They add up for organisations, because, you know, somebody off for a couple of days with a sprained ankle is still a cost that that company has to cover, and the more you have of those, then again the impact both on in terms of your production and also kind of, you know, costs, which are often hidden, you know, because people don't think about, you know, the time that's being lost by that individual being away, do increase. There's still sort of, you know, objects falling. Obviously, you know, knives and cuts are an issue within the food industry. Again, manual handling, similar to slips and trips, you know, aspects of it can be very physical, you know, and that has an impact on people's longer term health. Clearly sort of more on the agricultural side, where you're dealing with animals. We still have, you know, people getting trampled by cows or squashed against railings, so that still remains a problem. And although it doesn't tend to be very common, we do still get quite serious explosions within the, particularly again for the food industry, and they're quite often related dust explosions, so things like flour dust, actually if it's not managed and there isn't good housekeeping, can actually create some very serious explosion risks, and we do still see those coming through. More on the health side, which, you know, has historically not seen the same level of focus, but particularly with the ethical agenda and decent work, and you'll see when we come to talk about 45,001, health is really, you know, at the heart of what's driving these improvements. So you tend to see a lot of upper limb disorders, so repetitive strain disorders, because again, you know, sort of long production lines, highly repetitive, and you see disorders come from that. Occupational dermatitis, often a kind of overlooked and hidden issue in terms of health, particularly a particular issue sort of more on the catering side, where you're handling large amounts of food which is moist, or the actual juices can be quite corrosive. So things like onion and garlic are known to be really problematic for causing occupational dermatitis for those who are frequently exposed. Occupational asthma, again, coming very much from things like flour dust, but also coming back to more of the agricultural side, the dust created within those industries create various health issues. Noise-induced hearing loss is quite a considerable issue, and again, hidden, because it often doesn't show up until people are much older, and, you know, even potentially retired, but the impact it has on the quality of their life is huge. And, you know, again, food, but also, you know, particularly beverage industry, bottling is incredibly noisy in some processes, so a real issue. Increase focus on what we call psychosocial risks, so those aspects that have an impact on mental health and well-being, so particularly issues like work-related stress, physical, sexual and verbal abuse, bullying and harassment. You know, they're all sort of part of the psychosocial risks that can have this really negative impact on mental health. And then there's all the sort of things like Legionella, which I think a lot of people are very familiar with. You know, there's water is a often a big element within food and beverage production, and where you've got water, you know, you've always got the potential for Legionella. And then, you know, we still see what are called zoonosis, so those sort of viruses and diseases that come from animals. So there's a real mix across the industry that has an impact and needs to be considered in terms of occupational health and safety. So I don't expect you to be able to read this slide. It's actually even really difficult for me, and I'm sitting in front of the main screen. But this comes from an ILO, so the International Labour Organization report looking at health and safety in the supply chain. And I've really just put it on here to illustrate this point that, health and safety does run all the way through the supply chain. So right from, and if I just get the highlighter working, so right from production, all the way through the supply chain, distribution through to actually then further production, then distribution onwards, right through to the consumer. We really do have to consider that health and safety has an impact throughout the supply chain. What's the impact of poor health and safety on an organization? Well, I think we've seen, obviously there can be financial around prosecution, but actually, coming back to the point I made earlier when we were looking at the business disruptors, one of the biggest impacts within the food industry is the quality issue, so food safety risks. If you sort of step back and think about it objectively, if people don't feel that they are being looked after, and the processes or procedures that you have in place to look after them aren't working, then why are your food quality processes going to be any better? And people will be disengaged. So there is this really close link. So it's really something to consider for this industry. There's obviously going to be the impact in terms of actual downtime, particularly where there's been equipment that's been involved in an incident, that will be out of use for a period of time. There's obviously the lost production that goes with that, the absence of key workers. Then you've got sort of, and again, coming back to this idea of sort of hidden costs, the additional training cost of training up replacements, or the recruitment costs, even of temporary workers, these all add up through. We've touched on prosecution, things like additional overtime. So if you don't actually recruit new people in, you might have to pay additional overtime to cover the gaps. We've touched on, and we saw from the business continuity report, how important reputation is, and poor health and safety can have a huge impact on reputation. And then there tends to be, again, increased liability and insurance costs. And one of the things that often is, again, forgotten about is where there is a serious incident, where there's an investigation, there's a huge amount of resource that will be taken up in terms of actually taking part in delivering that investigation, and some of these investigations can take months and years, so again very long-term impacts. So what does that mean to your sustainable workforce? Well, we've touched on some of these themes already. It's really that poor health and safety can impact other perceived threats and issues. So we've touched on quality, touched on reputation, but I think it is worth re-emphasizing this point around talent and recruitment and retention. If there are key skills that you need within your business, and you've got a poor health and safety reputation, then it's going to be really difficult to recruit people in. And if you've got poor health and safety standards, then honestly, why is anybody going to stay working for you? Nobody wants to go home injured or made ill by the work that they do. So this becomes a real issue. So focus on protecting your people, and it will really do more than just address those health and safety concerns. Embedding this people-centered approach will actually make your organization far more resilient in the long run. So in terms of sort of just looking to summarize, you know, why good health and safety is good for business. It will improve food safety and overall quality. It will obviously drive reductions in injury and ill health, but importantly, and you know, when we talk about 45001 shortly, this new international health and safety standard, you know, there's a real focus about actually improving health and well-being. I've touched on the improvement in terms of staff retention, and we'll touch a little bit more on the engagement and morale piece shortly. We've talked about costs, legal compliance, improvement in the supply chain. And I think we carried out a customer survey to ask our clients what they found from adopting a health and safety management system. And 79% of them said it helped them comply with regulations. Obviously, within health and safety, there are a lot of regulations, you know, and they find that following a good practice framework in terms of management systems helps with that compliance. 64% said it managed their business risk. And I think this is really heartening, you know, to see that organisations are starting to understand that health and safety is more than just managing slips and trips or machinery safety. It is really a key part of their overall business strategy and business risk management, and that really ties into improvements in terms of organisational resilience and ensuring that your organisation is not just robust but also agile to make the most of opportunities. 57% said it inspired trust. And again, you know, 55% said it helped protect business in terms of managing reputation. So the key themes that I've talked about are really being echoed by our actual clients. You know, that I'm not making this stuff up. You know, that's actually what our clients are telling us in terms of, you know, the benefits of good health and safety. And, you know, just sort of as a final point, taking a proactive approach really does work. So unfortunately, you know, the food and beverage industry is still one of the industries that does have high numbers of injuries and fatalities and ill health. And in the UK, it was a particularly poor performing sector. So there was a drive by the industry and the regulator to really make improvements in terms of health and safety. It was called Recipe for Safety. And over the period that it's kind of had that focus, you can see there that the reduction, the impact, positive impact that intervention had. It's over 60% reduction in injuries in the food and drink sector since 1990. So again, you know, it can feel, particularly if you've got a health and safety management system, sometimes it can feel like, you know, can we continue to make improvements, or, you know, where do we start? But actually you can, and it can make a huge difference, you know, to the individuals who go home safe and healthy every night, as well as, you know, for making sure that your business is resilient and fit for the future. So I'm just going to talk around this strange thing, ISO 45001, and some of you, you know, I can see, because you're either not responsible for health and safety or it's only a key compartment of your own, might not have come across this. So it's the new global health and safety management system. And if you're familiar with other management systems, maybe quality 9001 or 14 for environmental, then it's part of that family, but it's specifically looking at occupational health and safety. So it's just over a year old now, and it was really created to address the need to provide a consistent global framework, which is focused on proactive prevention of injury and ill health, but also the provision of a safe and healthy workplace. And, you know, because previously there wasn't a single global best good practice management framework. There was, and some of you may be familiar with OSAS 18001, which sort of is what 45 is based on, which is was a UK standard, which was used globally, but it wasn't a full global standard, so it didn't have the same traction. And the key thing with 45001 is that there is a real emphasis on leadership, but importantly culture, so the attitudes and behaviours within the business that will have an impact. So the aims of 45001, as I've mentioned, this proactive approach to providing a safe and healthy workplace, and that's where there's a link with wellbeing initiatives if you have them. You've got to focus on health and safety first, but if you're doing added value initiatives around wellbeing, they link really well into 45001. Obviously, a prevention of work-related injury, but also this focus on health. These standards are developed for business to help business, and therefore it's about managing risk and improving performance as well as supporting legal compliance. And I think it is worth just focusing and remembering that these standards are created and driven by business need, and most importantly, it provides you a framework, a tool to help you manage health and safety risks really effectively, following good practice, so that you can have a robust system in place. What are some of the key themes of 45001? Well, the first one is around context of the organisation. So if you're familiar with other ISO standards, 45001 follows the same high-level structure, so the same basic format as other key ISO standards. So if you're familiar with say quality or environmental, or some of you hopefully will be familiar with the food management standards as well, you'll be familiar with this idea of context. And the key element really is around ensuring that health and safety is aligned with the strategic objectives of the business. So what does that mean? It means that health and safety is treated as a key part of day-to-day business. Historically, and we still see it now, unfortunately, that health and safety is kind of kept on the periphery. It's kind of sits alone. And what context does is really ensure that good health and safety management is embedded into good business practices, so linking them very directly. There's a real focus, as I've said, on leadership and culture. And again, leadership focus is seen in other ISO management standards, but 45001, really goes a step further. It asks for leadership to be much more proactively involved and take actual direct and visible ownership in terms of health and safety. And it talks about top management, and so it's about all of top management taking responsibility and accountability to health and for health and safety. So for those of you who are familiar with 18001, which is this other, the British standard, the BSI's management system, it talked about having a nominated board member responsible for health and safety. The challenge with that was it meant that quite often the rest of the board, said, well, it's not my responsibility, and didn't engage. 45001 expects the whole of the management chain to be involved and take responsibility and accountability. Culture, really, really important. So this is unique to 45001. That it actually talks about culture, and that organisations need to continuously improve their culture. And again, I know there's a lot of conversation around food safety culture within the sector at the moment. And the key thing is culture, actually the behaviours, the attitudes that make good culture
are the same, whether they're health and safety or food safety, or in other sectors, things like healthcare. You know, the culture, the elements that make a good culture are the same. It starts from the top with leadership. Importantly, it includes and covers what's the last element on this slide, which is really good engagement with the workforce so that they are empowered. You know, it's really those two factors, leadership and engagement with the workforce, that drive a positive culture. So consultation and participation is a key theme within 45,001, and consultation is involving the workforce in decisions, involving them before a decision is made, and participation is involving them in decision making. Now, that doesn't mean to say everything and every decision, but it's around having processes to make sure that you're engaging with your workforce. And then again, you know, objectively, if you step back and think about it, you know, who's going to be best placed to understand what the risks are within an organisation than actually those doing the job. And they'll often be the ones best placed to come up with the best and most effective solutions. And, you know, by having that two-way conversation, you're not only empowering your workforce, you're ensuring the success of the health and safety management system, because if they feel involved, they're much more likely to actually follow the processes, you know, and feel engaged in that way. And that's what drives a positive culture. So I think it's just because culture is so important, just thinking about the development of sort of culture, and particularly within health and safety, but you could easily swap out health and safety for food safety on this slide. What tends to happen is there is a focus to begin with around, you know, just sort of technology, and it says standards, but it's more processes and procedures, as administrative standards, you know, but incident rates remain high, although there are some improvements. So to drive further improvements, organisations will then look to implement a health and safety management system, and that makes, you know, again, really positive impact in terms of improving health and safety. You know, you get improved reporting, improvements around competence, and improvements in risk management. But quite often then what happens is there's a plateauing in terms of the improvements that health and safety management brings. And that's where the focus on culture becomes so important, because that focuses on behaviour across the organisation, but particularly at the highest level around leadership. And that's what drives these real improvements. So other themes just to touch on in terms of 45,001. So there is a focus around risks and opportunities, and that is, of course, traditional health and safety risks, but again, also broader business risks. So again, you know, making sure that health and safety is a core part of business risk management and not this standalone area. And the opportunities is really important. You know, I think one of the things that we often do when we talk about health and safety and risk is we tend to think of them as kind of being negatives and just prevention. But by having a focus on opportunities, it's looking at what can be done proactively and what can make a positive difference. There is, of course, a focus on eliminating those hazards that give rise to injury and ill health, and importantly, again, taking a very specific approach to reducing those risks, so looking to design them out or eliminate where you can, and that's a key part of this standard. And I've touched on that health is really important, and it's not just physical health, but it talks about mental and cognitive health. So again, really reflecting that there's increased awareness around what I termed earlier, these psychosocial risks, you know, things like occupational stress, bullying and working hours. You know, that's a key area that is a focus within 45,001. So again, key element around management of change. So one of the things that we know both from a quality point of view, but particularly for health and safety, that is that, you know, any change can have really negative impacts on health and safety. And actually, change can give rise to occupational stress. It's one of the recognised things that can cause occupational stress within a business. So, you know, managing change effectively and learning from undesired and unexpected change is at the heart of 45,001. There's a significant focus on procurement, so looking at your management down the supply chain and working with contractors. And again, you know, that's to reflect, if you like, this broader ethical agenda, which we started with around protecting your reputation and brand through that supply chain. And as with all management standards, you know, it's not static. It's about actually continuing to improve performance and drive improvements across the organisation. So I thought it was worth just touching on, you know, how health and safety links to recognised food safety practices. And I think sometimes we forget that, you know, food safety is a risk management system, as is health and safety. So the principles and processes, you know, work across them, you know, and if you've got the skills and knowledge and capability for managing food safety, then, you know, you're going to have good knowledge and capabilities for delivering good health and safety performance. So, you know, HAZAP, so hazard analysis and critical control points, really fundamental within food industry. You know, you'll be identifying the same hazards. You know, hazards from a food safety point of view will often be hazards from a health and safety point of view. So you're going to be capturing a lot of these health and safety risks. And things like, you know, good manufacturing practices, such as personal hygiene, and staff amenities, you know, these are the same requirements that will help you with health and safety, you know. So if you've got these processes in place, even if, you know, maybe you haven't started, you know, or you're not very far with your journey around health and safety management, actually you're going to have a huge amount, you know, in place, you know, so you're not starting from scratch. You know, you really are well on the journey. So I thought it was worth obviously mentioning the other ISO standard, 22,000, which is on food safety management. Some of you may be familiar with that. I mentioned before that 45,001 follows the same high-level structure, the same format as other management systems, and, you know, that's certainly the case for 22,000. Again, risk management, so there is this alignment. Workers are a critical interested party, both for food and for health and safety. And then really specifically, and this is where I get a little bit geeky, and I'm sorry, I'm going to quote a clause, 7.1.4, around work environment. Actually, you know, what is the environment that your organisation needs to create in terms of managing a good food safety management, and then it gives some examples, and you can see that these are the same things that will impact health and safety. You know, bullying and harassment, stress, all of those elements, you know, physical temperature, heat, you know, they have a real impact on physical health and safety. So there really is this relationship between the two. And that brings us to our second poll of the session. And I'll hand back to Erica.
Thanks, Kate. Some really, really interesting points there, especially linking health and safety and food safety and how the management systems really do sit hand in glove. So our second poll of the day is in the 2018 BCI report, it was stated that health and safety ranks second in business disruption risks, as Kate went through with us. Is health and safety a top 3 priority for your business? So we're looking here to see, if the people on this call, if it's really up there, if the leadership have set this out as a business priority, or if there are other things maybe that are pushing the health and safety off the top spot or off the top 3. So a mixed bag here then. So for just over half of you, health and safety is definitely a top 3 priority for the business. And then there's a number of you who either aren't sure or it's not a top 3 priority. So Kate, what do you think of those results?
Thanks, Erica. So I think that's really interesting. Thank you for taking part in the poll. Great news. I'm going to round that up to nearly 60%. See health and safety as a priority, top 3 priority. I think obviously for those of you that don't know, I think that's something to explore in terms of maybe the culture of your organisation, in terms of the communication about health and safety. I'm hoping that for those of you that said no, it's number 4 on your priority list. So I'm going to read it as that, and hope it's just not being ignored. So just, I'm not going to go all the way through this. I think, hopefully you've seen and can understand the benefits that having a management system like 45001 can bring to your organisation, not just in terms of actually reducing injury and ill health, but also the bigger and broader business benefits in terms of quality, people, productivity, and on all of those elements. So I thought I just would touch on sort of what does implementation of a health and safety management system look like, and for those of you who maybe have 18001, what's happening with that now that this new standard has come out. So the implementation journey for health and safety management system is the same for all organisations, big or small. Don't let this sort of complex diagram put you off. It's really very simple and straightforward. Do a gap assessment, understand where you are, what you need to do. Get your priorities in place. And I think, as I've touched on, if you've got food safety management processes in place, you're going to be, well on the way to having an effective health and safety management system. So, you really will have a lot in place, and you'll be, I'm sure, complying with the law. And again, if you're following legal requirements, then again you're going to have a lot of the structures in place, so you're not going to be starting from scratch. You obviously need to consider your training requirements, just in terms of sort of rollout and actually informing people, but also then further down the line, things like lead auditor training. Then often organisations, they'll do the work in terms of developing their management system. They'll do a desktop review, implement it and roll it out through the organisation. Get it embedded, and that's the point that if you want to seek certification recognition by an accredited body, then you can look at that process and journey. So for those of you, just in case, who do have 18001, it is going to be withdrawn. It's being replaced by ISO 45001. So we are now in the migration period, and it will be fully withdrawn in March 2021. And if you want to maintain your certification, your health and safety certification, you do have to migrate to 45001 in within that time frame. And that brings us up to our final poll of the session, and we have got time left for questions. So, you know, while you're taking part in the poll that Erica's just going to take over on shortly, do also feel free to ask any questions. So thank you, Erica.
So which of the below describes your organisation's position in relation to ISO 45001? So are you certified, working towards certification, considering certification, or currently have no plans to certify to ISO 45001? Or perhaps don't know because you're not sure of the business priorities, perhaps from the last question. So here we go. Many of you working towards certification, or some of you already straight on there, already certified. A number of you are considering ISO 45001 certification. So perhaps this webinar was something to help you to explore whether it's right for you. And then there are a number of you who aren't sure or don't really have current plans to certify to ISO 45001. So we'll go back to Kate for comments on the poll, and then I'll go to asking Kate some of the questions that you've submitted.
Lovely, thank you, Erica. Great news that some of you are already on that journey. I hope that you're already seeing the benefits that I've touched on in terms of actually having 45001 in your organisation. Hopefully for those that who are considering it, this is helped reinforce why it would be a good idea, and for those of you who currently have no plans, then maybe you're thinking differently by the end of this session. As I mentioned at the start, you know, it's obviously impossible to cover everything in a webinar. You'll all be, as we've just found, you know, at different points in your journey. We have a huge amount of free resource on our website. So we have leaflets that explain 45001 in more detail. For those of you who have maybe got 18, there's things like a mapping guide to show where it's the same or where it's different. So you know, similarities and differences between 18001 and 45001. You know, if you are migrating, what that looks like. And there's also a series of downloadable WebExes that we ran last year, which explore the standard in more detail. So you have the option to access all of those. So that brings us nicely, hopefully in time to answer some questions. So Erica, have we got any exciting questions?
Yeah, we've got a few. So the first question that we'll ask is, ISO 45001, does it require a health and safety committee?
Okay, great question. So I touched on that one of the sort of the key themes in 45001 was around consultation and participation. And one of the key requirements of leadership, and this is expressly written in the standard, is that if one of the ways that you implement effective consultation and participation is to have a health and safety committee, then leadership must support that committee. The standard itself doesn't say you must have a health and safety committee. What it says is if you implement a health and safety committee as one of your ways for meeting the consultation and participation requirements, then top management have to support it. Erica, have we got any further questions?
Yeah, so I think we've got time for one or two more of the questions. So thanks to everyone who's submitted today. The next question was in relation to change management and stress. How would we deal with that with training?
So thank you, great question. So I think one of the areas that organisations, as I touched on, you know, sometimes underestimate is the impact that even small amount of change will have on individuals, or just the uncertainty of whether change is going to happen or not. So, you know, a key part of management of change is really effective communication processes. So ensuring that, you know, you've got the right skills and capabilities around managing effective communication. But it is also really important to ensure that people understand what causes occupational stress and what steps that you can take. And there's some, you know, there's very good training out there on that, and that's something that BSI can support you with in the future as well.
Great, thanks, Kate. So yeah, unfortunately we're not getting to the other questions, but we will get answers back to the individuals whose questions haven't been featured. So yeah, I'd just like to take this time to thank Kate very much for her expertise on the webinar today. And Kate is featured in a lot of our other ISO 45001 webinars, so do check those out on the website. Also like to thank everyone who's joined today, and please do leave us your feedback on this poll and on the closing poll to let us know if you like this webinar and how we can improve the next food sector webinar for you.